Well, what a game to end the round. Down in Tasmania, North Melbourne, one of the bottom sides, up against the reigning premiers in Brisbane, and it ended in a draw, 71 apiece between North Melbourne and the Lions. Now, to the injuries on Brisbane's point of view, Jared Berry unfortunately was concussed midway through the opening term and was subbed out soon after, so really unfortunate he will be missing next week. But getting to the game itself was a really free-flowing game of football with barely any tackles in the opening term, and it was really low scoring, but it was the Lions who finished the quarter with 2-1 to lead by 9 points at the first change. But the Kangas got off strong in the second quarter as they kicked 2 early goals to take the lead for the first time. The mids were winning from clearance and it translated onto the scoreboard. But this seemed to spark the Lions. Brisbane kicked 4 goals in response to take a game-high 21-point lead, and it was thanks to their pressure. It was immense for the majority of the second quarter, and at the main break they led by 20 points. Now, the Roos once again had a really good start to the second half with the first goal, before the game became very contested as the conditions became a lot cooler. Brisbane kicked 5 behinds in a row as the margin hovered around 15 points for the first half of the third term. But the dominance of North Melbourne through the clearances went onto the scoreboard as they kicked 2 quick goals to be within 3 points. But Brisbane did get a late goal to bring the margin to 9 points in their favour heading into the final term. And even though we thought maybe Brisbane would run away with it in the final quarter, after North Melbourne got the first goal, it set up for a very interesting final term. It was pretty goal for goal for the first third of the final term before North Melbourne got 2 goals in a row to take the lead. This was the first time since early in the second quarter. Now, Brisbane quickly responded to get back in front, but a goal either way with about 5 minutes to go set up for a grandstand finish. Brisbane took a 1-point lead, but North Melbourne quickly got one back from Cam Zurhaar, and then they had one final moment, North Melbourne, to win the game. Unfortunately, though, Constanti wasted his opportunity blasting inside the forward 50 for Payne to spoil it out of bounds. As the time ticked down, unfortunately, scores ended all square. So, well done to North Melbourne to compete with the reigning premiers all afternoon. So, well done to North Melbourne. It does feel like that win's going to be coming. They have Richmond next week, which is a really big contest for them. They should go into that one as favourites. And Brisbane, I thought they kind of turned a page over the last couple of weeks. However, this was pretty poor today. I do think down at Hobart it was going to be tough for them, but nonetheless, you still expect a little bit better from the reigning premiers. So, not the greatest performance from Brisbane. They kind of got away with 2 points in the end, in my opinion. But moving to the statistics of this game, on the multiple goal kickers for North Melbourne, Zurhaar and Darling both with the 2. For the Lions, 3 goals to Hipwood along with Cam Rayner. On the disposals, for the Kangas, Davies Uniacke with 32, Sheasel 29, Parker 23, Stevens 22, and Coleman with the 21. And for the Lions, Zorko 39, McCluggage 28, Dunkley 27, Will Ashcroft 26, and Fletcher with a 25. And on the AFL fantasy front, Tristan Cherry with the 116, Parker 112, Sheasel 103, Davies Uniacke 98, and Coleman with the 82. And for the Lions, Zorko 137, McCluggage 115, Dunkley 111, Will Ashcroft 100, and Jasper Fletcher with the 86. But before we get to the votes of the first game, we have to reveal the members' vote for round 8. How the members' vote works for you guys. For the review in 2025, a 3-2-1 voting system is awarded for every single game of the AFL season on the channel. And each round, players who receive 3 votes in the game have a chance to get a bonus vote. I will decide the 4 best players from the round who will enter a poll exclusive for channel members to vote on, and the winner of that poll will receive the bonus vote for the round, the members' vote. And at the end of the 2025 AFL season, every vote counts. So this is your chance to have your say on the 3rd ever Boundary Riders medalist. So if that appeals to you, or if you just want to show some extra support on the channel, then make sure to click the channel membership link down below and join in the fun. But for now, let's get back into the video. And the members' vote for round 8 goes to Geelong star Patrick Dangerfield. But let's get to the votes in this game. 3 votes Tristan Cherry, 2 votes Harry Sheasel, and the 1 vote to Cam Rayner. Tristan Cherry absolutely monstered Oscar McInerney today. Oscar McInerney is no pushover ruckman either, so I really have to give credit to Tristan Cherry. I think he had a pretty slow start to the year after having a pretty well All-Australian season last year without getting the spot in the team. Almost single-handedly took his team over the line in the end. Did have an opportunity to kick a goal, which he set up rather than go for goal, but 19 touches, 8 tackles and 36 hit-outs. He was immense today. And at clearance, it was one of the best ruckman performances at clearance I've seen. He had 12 clearances, 3 of them through the centre. Harry Sheasel, I know there's been a lot of talk about through the early parts of the year that he has his cheesy touches or his easy touches, but I think it was his best performance of the year so far. 29 touches, 7 marks, patrolled that back 50 and set up quite a few opportunities towards goal tonight. So I think he did really well. I think it was definitely his best performance of the year. Had 6 score involvements. Cam Rayner, I think, was the best player for Brisbane, despite a couple of players getting a lot of high disposals. I think Cam Rayner did really well in the first half. He did kick 3 goals in the end from 14 touches, hence why he got the 1 vote. So next up, we have the Cats up against GWS at GMHBA Stadium, a ground where not many teams find much luck, but the Giants go 5 wins in a row down at the Cattery as they went on to win by 4 points in an absolute classic. 101 to the Cats, 105 to the Giants. There was one injury concern from this one, which was Jake Stringer. Unfortunately, had an issue with his hamstring in the second term and was put on ice late in the latter stages of the first half after being subbed out. So really unfortunate for Jake Stringer. Seemed to have got into a bit of form last week and had a good start to this game, but unfortunately will probably miss at least 2 or 3 weeks with a hammy. But getting to the game, it was extremely high scoring in the opening term, with both teams being very efficient when going inside 50. However, it was the Giants who broke away early when they kicked 5 of the first 6 goals of the contest, but a late 2 goals from Geelong saw them reduce the margin to just 10 points a quarter time. Now, the Cats continued early on in the second term with 3 of the next 4 goals to take the lead for the first time, despite a high-scoring first half, both teams' pressure was quite high. It was a game of momentum, with either team taking their chances in the sun. Again, the Giants fought back as they took the lead midway through the second term, and it seemed they were getting back to their better form from the start of the season. But the goals didn't let up. We saw 18 goals between both sides in the first half, and it didn't separate either team as the Cats took a very small margin heading into the main break by 1 point. But the high scoring did seem to slow down in the third quarter. It was a goal either way to start the quarter before GWS made a nice break with 3 in a row. However, a late Cats goal did see the margin reduced to just 7 points at the final break. And the final term was finals-like. Both teams had huge opportunities to win the game. And in a goal-for-goal final term, with only minutes left, the Giants led by just under a goal. The Cats had 3 separate chances to snatch a win, but Riccardi's goal for GWS was enough to see them hold on to a 4-point win. So the Giants, this is an unbelievable performance. I know they have a great record down in Geelong, but they have been in terrible form the last 3 weeks. So to go down there, up against Geelong, who are in red-hot form, to win this game is unbelievable. So credit to Adam Kingsley, credit to the Giants group. They were brilliant today, led by their key forward, Jesse Hogan, who we'll get to in a moment. And Geelong, they had opportunities to win this game. They really should have won it. They missed 3 very gettable opportunities in the final term to win this one, and they missed all of them. So they really only have themselves to blame. But moving to the multiple goal kickers of this one, for Geelong, 2 goals to Stengel, Cameron, Dempsey, and Manor. And for the Giants, Jesse Hogan, top scorer with a 7 goals won, getting back to his best, and Jake Stringer with the 2. On the disposals for the Cats, Smith with 34, Holmes 30, Myers 23, Duncan and Sam DeConing with the 21. And for GWS, Tom Green with 37, Whitfield 30, Callahan with the 29, Ash 25, and Hogan with the 22. And finally, on the AFL fantasy front, Bailey Smith with a 147, Max Holmes 118, Blitzars 115, Myers 99, and DeConing with the 92. And for GWS, Jesse Hogan 133, along with Tom Green, Lockie Whitfield with the 103, Callahan 97, and Ash with the 93. But getting to the votes, pretty simple 3-voter, Jesse Hogan, 2 votes to Tom Green, and the 1 vote to Max Holmes. Jesse Hogan, 7 goals. He's had a bad couple of weeks since returning from injury, but today he was back to his best. 7 goals, back to that Coleman medal form. 22 touches as well from any key forward is amazing, but just led from the front. Tom Green's had a pretty underrated season so far for GWS. He had a little bit of an injury worry through the early parts of the year, but 37 touches, 4 tackles, 7 marks. He's been one of the shining lights in their losses over the last few weeks, and today he reaped the rewards, so well done to him. And Max Holmes was, I think, the best player for Geelong. 30 touches, had 11 score involvements in the first half. He was really, really good, and despite Bailey Smith getting a lot of disposals and 10 tackles, I thought Max Holmes was really good today, and has been down over the last few weeks. A really good response from him. So the first game on Sunday, of course, was Richmond up against the West Coast Eagles, and sometimes these cellar-dweller games can make for an interesting contest, and this one lived up to the billing. It was a very close game all the way to the final siren, but it was the Tigers who held on by 2 points in a nail-biter. The Tigers 81, West Coast 79. Now the Tigers dominated the majority of the opening term. They dominated field position, ball control, everything except clearance, which was the only way the Eagles actually scored throughout the opening term. Richmond kicked the first 3 goals of the contest and held ascendancy for the quarter, but 2 late Eagles goals saw them reduce the margin to just 7 points at the first break. And West Coast actually got going in the second term. They kicked 2 early goals and they turned the game on its head and took the lead for the first time. However, Richmond kicked 2 goals in response to regain the lead, and it was more a goal-for-goal contest for the remainder of the term, with West Coast dominating the clearance but the Tigers winning contested ball. With both teams fighting hard, at the main break, Richmond only held a 1-point lead. Now, in the second half, the Tigers started really well with the first goal of it, but then the Eagles made their move. They kicked 2 goals in quick succession, and midway through the term, they found themselves in front. But after 3 consecutive misses to have a real chance of putting a real margin on the Tigers, unfortunately, they made them pay on the counter, Richmond, kicking 2 late goals to take a 4-point lead heading into the final change. Now, the Eagles started well with an early goal to give themselves the lead earlier before Richmond responded with one of their own. With the game on the line, every moment counted for so much more. Both teams had big chances to give themselves an advantage. West Coast got 1 goal back to take the lead once again, but they only held a slender 1-point advantage. And the Tigers locked it in their forward half for pretty much the remainder of the game. They had chance after chance, but couldn't get a goal. They got 3 behinds in a row to take a 2-point lead, and even though they couldn't get a meaningful lead, in the end the Tigers did enough to hold on in the final moments, courtesy of a great tackle from the young Brown to save the game, and in the end they got their 3rd win of the season, Richmond. So well done to the Tigers. I don't think anyone would have seen them getting 3 wins at this stage of the year. They're sitting up there with Melbourne and Sydney right now, and that is just really good from them. So really good from a young side in West Coast. They had opportunities to win this game. It's another one loss, then 0-9 now. And next week, it's really hard to see where they're going to get their first win. They're getting closer, but I don't know. I mean, I'm sure they'll get one, but right now, it's just going to be tough. Really unfortunate for Andrew McWalter. But getting to the statistics of this game, the multiple goal kickers for Richmond, Lynch, Mansell, and Campbell all with 2. For the West Coast Eagles, Cripps with 3, Owies and Williams with the 2. On the disposal, Sam Banks top for the Tigers with the 28, Taranto 27, Hopper 24, McIntosh and Campbell with the 19. And for the Eagles, Marek with the 25, Baker 22, Graham 20, along with Duggan and Reed with the 18. And finally on the AFL Fantasy front for Richmond, Taranto 94, 93 to Banks and Nankervis, 83 to Campbell and 80 to McIntosh. And for the West Coast, Graham 104, Marek 92, Baker 91, Cripps 88, and Flynn with the 82. But getting to the votes in this game, 3 votes, Jack Graham, 2 votes, Tim Taranto, and the 1 vote to Jamie Cripps. Jack Graham, this is one of the best pressure games I've seen for a midfielder in some time. And for a player that's playing for the West Coast Eagles, he was immense today. Had 13 tackles. He led from the front. And against his former side, he did really well. So I think kudos to him. Tim Taranto, I think, was the best player on the ground for the Tigers. He did everything, especially in the first half. He was really up there. So really good job from him. And Jamie Cripps with the 3 goals. He's been having a pretty underrated season. I know it's pretty tough to score goals for the West Coast Eagles, but he's doing really well for them. On Saturday night, of course, we had the 57th installment of the showdown, and this one truly lived up to the billing. The margin barely passed 3 goals for the majority of the contest, and Port Adelaide fought back in the final moments to almost steal a win. But it was the Adelaide Crows who win their 29th showdown, take the lead over Port Adelaide in total showdowns won to win by 5 points. Adelaide 89, Port Adelaide 84. Now, this was a great start from the Adelaide Crows. They were dominant in most facets of the game and opened the scoring with the first 2 goals of the contest. However, as the quarter went on, Port Adelaide's engine room got to work and brought the margin back to within a kick in the latter stages of the opening term, and at the first break, Adelaide only led by 3 points. Now, it was goal for goal to start the second term, but Adelaide were able to string a couple together midway through the second term to give themselves a handy break. But Port Adelaide fought their way back. They kicked 2 goals in response to take the lead late in the first half for the first time. However, a goal on the siren from Josh Rochelle saw the Crows lead at the main break by just 1 point. However, heading into the second half, Port Adelaide had an amazing start. They were winning every metric on and off the ball, and they were able to kick the first 2 goals of the quarter. Before the Crows came out and responded in style, they kicked 3 goals in a row to regain the lead, and at the end of the third quarter, the Crows led by just 2 points. But when the Crows came out with the first 3 goals of the final term in quick succession to take it to a game-high 21-point advantage, it seemingly looked like the game was beyond doubt. But as we've seen in every great showdown, the power would fight back. They dominated field position and had countless opportunities in front of goal. But they kicked themselves out of it in a sense. But they did find themselves with just a couple of minutes to go within a kick. But it was the Irishman in Mark Keane for the Crows who took a game-saving mark, and in the end, Adelaide held on for a 5-point win. So what a showdown we witnessed tonight. The Crows take the win ledger in front for them. They win 29 now to 28. It was a great game, pretty much from start to finish. Port Adelaide, a great response from last week after a dreadful performance against the Western Bulldogs. But the Adelaide Crows are really fighting for a top 8 spot now. If they can win their games at home and bank a couple of wins away, they could honestly be fighting for top 4. Their forward line was outstanding. Their midfield was down, but their defence has been standing up gallantly so far this year. So great job from the Crows. And Port Adelaide, like I said, it was a great response, but they really should have been able to win this one. They dominated the final term in field position, but missed some crucial chances in front of goal. So they'll be ruining a lot of those those missed opportunities. But getting to the statistics of this one, on the multiple goal kickers for Port Adelaide, Finlayson with the 3, Georgiades, Burn-Jones and Pal Pepperell with the 2, and for the Crows, Fogarty and Thilthorpe with the 3, Keys, Rankin and Rochelle with the 2. On the disposals for Port Adelaide, Butters with the 33, Rosie with the 32, 31 to Wines, 23 to Bergman and 20 to Horne-Francis. And for Adelaide, Peatling 24, Worrell 23, Keys 21, Keane and Laird with the 18. And finally, for anyone out there watching the AFL Fantasy, we have Connor Rosie with the 122, Bergman 112, Wines 97, Butters 91 and Burton with the 90. And for Adelaide, Riley O'Brien with the 124, Peatling 117, 92 to Thilthorpe, 91 to Keys, and 84 to Worrell. But we'll get to the votes in this one. 3 votes, Connor Rosie, 2 votes, Riley Thilthorpe, and the 1 vote to Miles Bergman. Now, I know there was a little bit of contention on the showdown medalist being Connor Rosie. People were saying that Riley Thilthorpe deserved it. I thought if it was voted at halftime, Riley Thilthorpe 100% deserved it. However, in the second half, he only had 4 touches, didn't have much impact at all. So I actually believe that Connor Rosie deserved the showdown medal, in my opinion. I thought he was brilliant for Port Adelaide tonight. He did make a couple of errors, but overall, I think he was the real reason why Port Adelaide stayed in it when the Crows were on top, and that's why I think he deserved the 3. Riley Thilthorpe was brilliant in the first half. I thought that he was going to run on to have 6 goals in this game. He was exceptional in the first half. He did drop off in the second half, though, hence why he got the 2 votes. And Miles Bergman, he had an interesting role tonight. He played as a tagger on Jordan Dawson, a role that he hasn't really done before, but he did it brilliantly. Really locked down the captain for the Crows and went a long way to almost taking this win for Port Adelaide. But overall, what a great showdown we saw. I think we need to make a petition to see this game starting the round on Thursday night next year. Now, the other game on Saturday night was up at the top end, the Gold Coast up against the Dogs, and the Gold Coast led through the majority of the second half, but a late comeback saw the Dogs send a huge scare through the Gold Coast camp, but the Suns held on in the end to win by 10 points. 106 to the Suns, 96 to the Dogs. Now, there was one injury concern from this one, which was Lathan Vandermeer. Had an issue with his calf in the third term after kicking a goal. He did come on and off throughout the third term for a little bit, but eventually he was ruled out with a calf strain. But getting to the game itself, it was a wayward start for either side, with both teams trying to assimilate to the conditions. The Gold Coast were able to kick the first, but the Dogs kicked back and their pressure was immense early. But the Suns were able to put 3 goals in a row, put a nice handy break on the Bulldogs with a 20-point lead. However, a good finish from the Western Bulldogs brought the margin back to 8 points at the first break. Now, the Dogs kicked an early goal to start the second quarter, but both teams missed some early chances. However, it was the Suns who kicked 2 in a row, and they dominated field position. But a late goal from the Doggies saw the Suns only hold a 7-point lead heading into the major break. Now, the Suns kicked an early goal to start the second half, but the Dogs kicked 2 in response to take the lead for the first time since the opening minutes of the contest. But that seemed to just spark the Suns. They kicked 3 goals in a row to take an 18-point lead midway through the quarter. But the Doggies again responded as the game once again came back to an even keel. But every single time the Dogs seemed to fight back in this game, the Gold Coast would respond. They kicked another 3 goals, which once again took the game to a game-high 21-point lead in the shadows of three-quarter time. And at the final change, the Gold Coast headed in with a 22-point lead. And when the Suns kicked the first goal of the final term, the game seemed over midway through the quarter. The Dogs looked tired, and the Gold Coast looked full of run. But the Bulldogs sprung into life. It really came out of nowhere. The Dogs kicked 4 goals in quick succession, and with 3 minutes left on the clock, they found themselves within a kick. It was tough, intense, and one hell of a finish, but in the end, the Suns held on for a big 10-point victory. So I think it's pretty safe to say over the past month or so, the Gold Coast have been very down after a hot start to their season. But this was a really good performance from them. They seem to really enjoy the conditions up in the NT. So well done to the Gold Coast on the winners list tonight after a really poor month, and they really deserve this win. And hopefully with a game next week against the Hawthorn Footy Club up in the NT, they can potentially get their second win in a row, get their season right up and going. And for the Dogs, I was going to be really tough to win up there, even though they've been really good so far this year. Playing at the NT is just a new kettle of fish. So really good performance from them to fight back, but unfortunately just couldn't get done in the end. But moving to the multiple goal kickers of this one, Ben King kicked the 3, 2 goals to Graham, Holman and Flanders. On the Bulldogs, Kennedy with the 3, 2 goals to West, Vandermeer and Davidson. On the disposals for the Suns, Anderson 28, Miller 25, 24 to Humphrey and Rioli, and 23 to Noble. And for the Dogs, Liberatore 35, Dale and Richards with the 31, Bontempelli 28, Fraser 24. And finally, on the AFL fantasy front, Miller with the 90, Humphrey with the 89, 87 to Noble, 85 to Rioli and 82 to Anderson. And for the Doggies, Liberatore with the 140, he was brilliant. Ed Richards with the 131, Kennedy 114, Dale 105 and Bontempelli with the 104. But getting to the votes in this one, 3 votes Tom Liberatore, 2 votes Ed Richards, 1 vote Bailey Humphrey. Liberatore did everything he could tonight to drag his team over the line. Unfortunately, it was just a little little bit too late for them. 35 touches, 10 tackles, and 6 marks. Even with Bontempelli back in the team, he still rules the roost in there, it seems. Great job from Libba. Ed Richards has been arguably one of the best players of the season so far. He kicked the goal tonight, 31 touches, 131 fantasy points, and he's the highest rated player in the game right now. Ed Richards just seemingly is having one of the best seasons he could have had. Played a lot of halfback throughout his early career, but now chucked into the midfield. He's added a nice little bit of spark to the doggies. And Bailey Humphrey, I think, was the best player on the ground for the Suns tonight. Did kick 2 behind, so he could have hit the scoreboard a bit more. But last year he had a pretty good performance up there as well. So he seems to like the conditions up in the Northern Territory. So now we head to Marvel Stadium with the Bombers up against Sydney, and for the first 3 quarters, it was all Essendon. The Swans did fight back in the final term, but it was all too late as the Bombers held on to an 8-point win. 71 to the Bombers, 63 to the Swans. Now, there's one injury concern from this game. Really unfortunate for the first gamer in Lewis Hayes. Unfortunately, it landed awkwardly after a great effort in the air in the defensive marking contest, and unfortunately, he had to be helped from the ground and was subbed out. So hopefully it's not too concerning, but when these sort of situations happen, immediately it goes to the thought of an ACL. Hopefully that's not the case though. Getting to the game, the Swans dominated field position for the majority of the opening term, but their discipline was terrible. Sydney gave away 4 50-metre penalties in the opening term, which resulted in the only 3 goals the Bombers got throughout the entire quarter. Now, Sydney did get a late goal, but the Bombers still led by 12 points at quarter time. And into the second term, the first 10 minutes of it was one of the worst displays of defensive pressure from Sydney that I've ever seen. Essendon broke tackles with ease, Sydney weren't manning up, and the Bombers made them pay. Essendon kicked 4 goals in a row to break out to a 31-point lead, and even though Sydney did improve midway through the quarter, a late flurry from Essendon saw them lead by 39 points at the major break. Now, the Swans did really well throughout the third quarter as their non-existent pressure from the first half lifted significantly, and they also lifted around the entire ground and started to make a dent into the halftime deficit. However, every time the Swans threatened to make their move, Essendon responded. Despite Sydney dominating the third quarter, they only ate into the halftime margin by 9 points and saw the Dons lead by 30 points at the last change. And heading into the final quarter, it was all Sydney. They did everything they could to make their way back into the contest, but they were wayward. They missed some crucial chances, and even though there was no goals from Essendon in the final term, they did enough in the end to hold on by 8 points. So well done to Essendon in the first 3 quarters. I think they could have been forgiven in the last couple of weeks beating up on some teams that are lower on the ladder. And even though Sydney haven't been great this year, they still are a much better side than probably the bottom 3 teams in the competition. So well done to the Bombers to win this game and hold on strongly in the final term. And on Sydney, they've got to start playing better than one half of footy or one quarter of football. The reason why they lost today was because of their first half. It was woeful, and they need to find a way up forward. I think they could grab someone from the VFL to play up forward who would be a lot better than Joel Hamling. I know he did well last week on the defensive efforts on Sam Taylor and Jack Buckley, but he's not a forward, and they need to find someone. I think Aaron Francis is the answer, but Dean Cox needs to settle this group, stop moving players around into different positions. I would almost play Isaac Heaney as a key forward up into the goal square. Let the younger guys play in the middle of the ground, play Chad Warner in the midfield, play Angus Sheldrick in the midfield. He had some good performances as a sub, but right now Sydney look all at sea. And at the moment, they're destined for almost a bottom 4 finish how they're playing. Moving to the stats on this one though, multiple goal kickers for Essendon. Nate Caddy with the 3, Zach Merritt with 2, and for Sydney, sole multiple goal kicker was Will Hayward with 2. On the disposals for Essendon, Nick Martin 38, McGrath with a 35, Redden with 32, Setterfield with 28, and Roberts with the 27. And for Sydney, Roberts with the 26, Chad Warner with the 25, 23 to Grundy, 22 to Lloyd and McInerney. And finally on the AFL fantasy front, Martin with the 141, McGrath with the 125 along with Will Setterfield, Zach Reid with the 118, and Jackson Pryor with the 115. And for Sydney, Nick Blakey with the 117, Brodie Grundy with the 114, Roberts 94, 86 to Chad Warner, and Rowbottom with the 84. But let's get to the votes. 3 votes, Zach Reid, 2 votes, Nick Martin, and the 1 vote, Andy McGrath. Zach Reid, I know there was a lot of talk about him in the early part of the season when they were playing poorly, but this guy is ready-made footballer. He had 27 disposals in the defensive 50 basically today. He dominated in the air in that defensive back, and for a guy that's played less than 15 games, he was outstanding. Now, granted, Sydney kicked it to him a lot, but well done to him. He is really standing up to those few doubters that he saw at the start of the season, so great job. Nick Martin just racked him up for fun, especially with a James Jordan tag on Zach Merritt. He did really well to stand up for his side, so really good job from him. And Andy McGrath was probably his best performance we've seen in the last 3 or 4 years. 35 touches today, 11 marks. He was really good in defence as well. So the first game on Saturday was Melbourne up against Hawthorn, and for the first 3 quarters, it was a real contest, but in the end, the cream rose to the top, and it was the Hawks who ran out winners by comfortably 35 points, 56 to the Demons, 91 to the Hawks. Now, it was a really good start for Hawthorn. They held the ball up in their forward half, but the scores were all square for the first 10 minutes of the contest. The Hawks did eventually put a little bit of a break on the Ds. However, Melbourne did well to only be a goal down in the latter stages of the opening term, and at quarter time, Hawthorn only held a 1-goal lead. And heading into the second term, neither team could really get flow into their game. The ball lived in between the arcs. However, we finally saw some rebound off of halfback from a turnover from the Hawks as they broke through to break the second quarter deadlock as the game started to open up. But in the second half of the second quarter, Melbourne dominated everything but the scoreboard. They only kicked 2 goals 7 for all their dominance, and at the main break, they found themselves behind by 1 point. Now, both teams missed some crucial chances early in the second half, especially Hawthorn. They had some big chances to push their lead, but only finished with 1 goal 3, and saw them lose the lead midway through the third term, with the Demons looking strong. However, with a late Hawthorn goal, they did take the lead to just 1 point at the 3-quarter time siren. But as all good sides do, even if you're not having a great game, you can find a way to win, and that's exactly what Hawthorn did. They finished the final term with 6 goals to 1, and in the end, Hawthorn won by 35 points. So overall, Hawthorn, I think most people would say, didn't have a very good day, but that final quarter just showed the difference between the two sides. Very good job from Hawthorn to break away in the end of Melbourne. I think they've had a very good month. After that performance at Gather Round, they've been able to respond, and I think they've got some good things going forward. Moving to the statistics, though, on the multiple goal kickers for Melbourne, Harvey Langford with the 3 goals and Pickett with the 2. On Hawthorn, Gunston with 3, Watson and Chol with the 2. On the disposals, Jake Bowie top for the Demons with a 28, Petrarca 26, 23 to Windsor and Rivers, and 22 to Langford. And for the Hawks, Warple 28, D'Ambrosio with the 26, Jath with the 25, Sicily 24, and Impey with the 22. And finally, on the AFL fantasy front, Max Gawn top for the Ds with the 112, Bowie 109, Pickett 107, Langford 95, and Petrarca with the 92. And for Hawthorn, Warple 113, Jath 107, Sicily 95, D'Ambrosio 89, and Ward with the 82. But now getting to the votes in this game. 3 votes, James Warple, 2 votes, Harvey Langford, and the 1 vote to Keziah Pickett. James Warple, very good performance from him today. John Newcombe was well held in the midfield, and Warple really stood up. 10 tackles as well, you'll have to see that for a midfielder. Harvey Langford, even though he's already got his Rising Star nomination, he would have definitely got a second one today if he was allowed to. 3 goals and 22 touches from any midfielder is outstanding. But from a guy who's had less than 10 games, outstanding performance from him. And Keziah Pickett, showing why he is so sought after by the WA club. So Friday night, of course, it was Spud's game at the MCG, St Kilda up against Carlton. And it was a very interesting contest for the majority of it, but it was the Blues who ran out strong and finished with a 15-point win. 77 to the Blues, 62 to the Saints. Now, there were a lot of injury concerns from this one. The players that were ruled out for Carlton in the end were Mitch McGovern, first of all, who received a big bump in the opening term through the midriff, and at quarter time was subbed out with an issue to his sternum. Now, they have said that they are checking his chest. He did go to hospital after the game, so hopefully all good there with Mitch McGovern, but a real concern going into next week. And Lockie Cowan was ruled out at halftime with hamstring tightness. Now, there were a couple of other injury concerns for the Blues, Blake Acres and Nick Haynes. However, they were able to run out the game. And on St Kilda, Jack Higgins, he was subbed out at 3-quarter time with the club saying he was out due to illness. But getting to the game itself, the Saints' pressure was hot early, and it translated onto the scoreboard with the opening 2 goals of the contest. However, midway through the term, the Blues made their charge as they kicked 4 of the next 5 goals in pretty quick succession to take the lead for the first time. However, a late Saints goal saw the quarter-time margin reduced to just 3 points going Carlton's way. Now, the Blues came out hot in the second term once again with 3 goals in a row to take the lead over 20 points. However, St Kilda did start to get into their work. They started to dominate field position but wasted a lot of opportunities, with only getting 2 goals for throughout the entire quarter, and at halftime faced a 14-point deficit. Now, heading into the second half, the game became a lot more of a dour affair. Throughout the entire third quarter, we only saw a goal to either side, and at 3-quarter time, the margin remained the same at 14 points. But the dour third term made the game feel a lot more intense throughout the final quarter. The Saints kicked the first 2 goals of it to set up for a grandstand finish, but the Blues held strong. They finished with the last 2 goals of the game, which included a fitting match-winning goal from Harry Mackay to see the Blues hold on to a 15-point win. So great job from the Blues. They get their 4th win of the season. A little bit of a poor performance last week against the Crows, but a real good return to form for them. Hopefully they can use this win to propel themselves into their season. 4 wins from the last 5 games is pretty good from the Blues. But St Kilda, with a lot of injuries on Carlton's side, they really should have been able to run over the top of the Blues, but really poor performance in the second half and just couldn't find some winning momentum going into the second half of that one. But moving to the statistics of this game on the multiple goal kickers for the Saints, Phillipou, Sharman and Higgins all with 2. For the Blues, Curnow and Mackay with 3, Lockie Young with the 2. On the disposals, Wanganeen Miller with 30, Sinclair with 26, Wilson 24, McRae 23 and Burns with the 22. And on Carlton, Hewitt and Cripps with 26, 22 to Binns, 21 to Walsh and De Koning. And finally, on the AFL fantasy front, for the Saints, Rowan Marshall with a 116, Steele with 109, Wanganeen Miller with 108, 99 to Wilson and Burns. And for the Blues, Mackay top scorer with the 112, Cripps 108, De Koning 104, 97 to Wiedering and Silvani with the 92. But getting to the votes in this one, 3 votes Harry Mackay, 2 votes Patrick Cripps and the 1 vote Jack Silvani. Harry Mackay, I mean, it's a fitting performance from him, of course, with all his mental health struggles throughout the early parts of this year. He finished with 3 goals tonight, 10 marks, 19 disposals from a key forward. He was brilliant, so great job from him. Paddy McCripps has definitely improved over the last 3 weeks or so. Really good job from him tonight, playing in the guts. 10 tackles as well. You really love to see that from him. And Jack Silvani, what a move he has made this year moving into defence. Missed last week against the Crows, but returned to form this week. Had 10 intercept possessions, 11 marks, and 17 disposals. As a key back, he has been a real shining light to start the Blues season. So really good job from him. So to the first game of round 9, it was Freo up against Collingwood. Really looking for a response from Fremantle, which we kind of did get, but Collingwood were just too strong in the end, winning out by 14 points. 83 to the Dockers, 97 to the Pies. Now there were a couple of injury concerns, one to either side. First of all, Sean Darcy was a little bit on and off throughout that second term with some sort of issue to his knee, and eventually he was subbed out in the third term. So just continues to get a lot of injuries, Sean Darcy. It'll be really interesting to see in the off-season what Fremantle do with their ruckman. And on Collingwood, Lockie Schultz received a heavy knock up against Clark in the early stages of the final term, and he was ruled out pretty much straight after in a sickening collision. We saw him collapse in the middle of the ground, and the game still wasn't stopped. Now, the AFL have made a couple of excuses for that, but nonetheless, Lockie Schultz will miss next week through concussion. But getting to the game itself, the Dockers started really well. They kicked the first 3 goals of the game before the Pies could even blink, and it was a real contrast to their last week's performance against the Saints. However, Collingwood did start to get into their work, and after 5 of the last 6 goals in the opening term, at the first break, the Pies did lead by 5 points. Now, Freo started well in the second term with the first 2 goals to regain the lead, and they dominated the field position. But unfortunately, the major killer throughout the whole night, and was really evident in the second term, were their turnovers. And as good sides do, Collingwood made them pay. And similar to the first quarter, the Magpies ended the quarter really strongly. They kicked 4 of the last 5 goals in the second term, and at halftime led by 10 points. And heading into the second half, the Pies kicked the first 2 goals to start it, and it seemed that they were about to just run away with it. But to credit to Freo, they did start to move the ball a lot quicker and gave themselves a bit of hope, being able to keep their opponents goalless of the remainder of the third term, and were able to get one of their own back to keep themselves within 15 points heading into the final change. Now, Freo started strongly in the fourth term as they opened up the game and started to move the ball with a lot more speed, but what cost them the most throughout the whole night, again, was their turnover. They made some crucial errors and gave themselves zero chance to fight back against Collingwood, who did enough in the final term. The Pies in the end ran out winners by 14 points. So despite resting a lot of players, Collingwood, they still found some really good players like Ned Long, who's been really good so far this year. A couple of really important games, especially without the impact that Nick Dacos couldn't really get into this game in the end. So really good job from Collingwood, winning away from home, getting back on the winners list in Fremantle. I just don't know what to say. It's been a really disappointing start to their year. They find themselves outside the top 8 now, and I'm really concerned about what they do going forward. But moving to the stats in this one, on the multiple goal kickers for Freo, Tracy and Voss both with the 2. On Collingwood, Jamie Elliott with the 6 goals, Bobby Hill with the 3 goals, and Jack Crisp with the 2. On the disposals for Fremantle, Brayshaw 34, Clark 33, Ryan 30, 28 to Bolton, and Sarong with the 25. And for the Pies, Jack Crisp 29. And then it kind of drops off. Cameron with 19, along with Josh Dacos, Nick Dacos with 18, and Jeremy Howe with a 17. And finally, on the AFL fantasy front, Jordan Clark with the 134, Ryan 122, Brayshaw 119, Bolton 97, and Jackson with the 92. And for the Pies, Jack Crisp 119, Cameron 113, Elliott 108, Bobby Hill 86, and Perryman with the 82. But getting to the votes in this one, pretty obvious 3 votes is obviously it's Jamie Elliott, 2 votes Jack Crisp, and the 1 vote to Jordan Clark. Jamie Elliott's having almost a career best year. 6 goals tonight. Did get 3 of them in the final term, but was obviously very dangerous. And 6 goals from a small forward. You're always going to get 3 votes in that. Jack Crisp, arguably his best performance of his career. Really stood up tonight with the players like Dacos being out of it, but really did well and really responded after that missed kick last week to win the game. And Jordan Clark was by far Fremantle's best player on the ground. Accumulated for fun. Did really well in defence as well, but unfortunately he was only one of the few shining lights for the Dockers. But guys, thanks for watching this episode of The Review. I hope you did enjoy it. And if you want to listen to the full episode, then make sure to go check us out on Spotify, as you can listen to the full episode there the morning after the round finishes. But that is all from me, guys. Make sure to like and subscribe if you did enjoy it. But for now, we'll catch you all in the next one.